Hey, I'm Sophie K here for Loudwire, and we've been working on a really cool project. Metalheads, I believe deep in my soul, are good people. We're people who are often judged for the way we look. We've been incarcerated for crimes that we didn't commit. There's been even murders in our community. And that's why, out of all people, metalheads should be the people who understand what it's like to be judged for the way you look. And that's why Loudwire decided to hold a roundtable in support of Black Lives Matter. Now, what we did is we brought together some amazing musicians from the scene. So we've got Derrick Green from Sepultura, Coyle from Bad Wolves, Cammie Gilbert from Oceans of Slumber, AJ Channer from Fire of the Gods, and probably most exciting to me personally is Mark Morton from Lamb of God, because I'm a huge fan of the band. And this project would not have happened without Mark Morton. And what's great is that he is such a strong ally, and I know that will mean a lot to so many fans of Lamb of God. Now, I want to make it clear that this isn't black versus white in this video. This is all about racism versus anti-racism. It's about educating ourselves to understanding what other people might be going through so that we can recognise issues that our bands are facing and fellow fans are facing. I'm going to try and stay as objective as possible in this conversation and try and express opinions from both sides and how people might be feeling. So let's try and keep the comments friendly and hopefully we all learn something. Let's start with you, Doc. What would you say to somebody? Do you think racism exists in metal?
Well, one, I want to say that I think the main point about that, I think it's the most kind of almost important idea right now, because I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of irrelevant. I think it's kind of obvious. Just literally go to a God forbid music video on YouTube and look at the comments and ask yourself if there's racism in metal. So that's the one thing. I mean, it's not, but I think there's this idea where people try to undermine someone else's reality, right? It's this idea that if I haven't experienced it, then it must not exist. And it kind of speaks to this idea about the limitations of empathy, that you can try to see the world through someone else's eyes, but you just can't. And the truth is, if someone feels like that's their experience, even if I've never experienced it, I have to give them kind of the latitude to express their experience. And by saying it doesn't exist, it's like that's the definition of gaslighting, right? Is that your experience is not real. And that's like a really crazy thing. And I've heard the opposite of that. I've heard people say cancel culture doesn't exist. And I'm like, it's this real weird way of kind of sandbagging other people's lived experience. And I think that's a bad fundamental way to approach any of this stuff, is by saying something doesn't exist.
Cammie, what would you say on the subject? Because I think it's very important to acknowledge that in the same way you can't talk about feminism without talking about race, you can't talk about race without talking about a woman's experience as well, because they're intertwined.
I mean, I think, racism exists everywhere. Just like Doc said, some of the first and worst racist slurs I've been called were on the videos of our first releases with Oceans. And it's one of those things that I feel like, well, the metal scene is incredibly encompassing. There are most certainly instances of people that exhibit racist actions towards others. And it's, I fully agree with Doc's summary of and that like perspective that someone's lack of experience doesn't cancel out mine. It's like I was there, I know what took place, I know how it made me feel, and that has to be realized, and there has to be space for that to be digested by those around me.
And I think one of the biggest things that maybe people need to really understand is this isn't a case of black versus white. It's black experience, and it should be all of us together. And so I think that's why it's really exciting that we have you on the call here, Mark, because this is something that you felt you wanted to speak on as well, isn't it? And your experience. Have you seen racism within metal?
I think my part here is to, I think there tends to be this sort of tendency for us as people to give examples as to maybe to make ourselves feel better. So, how can there be racism in metal? Derrick sings for Sepultura. How can there, and we love him. How can there be racism in metal? Doc plays guitar for Bad Wolves and we love him. You know what I mean? And I think that sort of looking at maybe our musical community as a microcosm of what would be a broader community of, our society or whatever, we do that, or that's done a lot in much broader issues. How can there be racism when Barack Obama was president for 8 years? That kind of thing. We find these little ways to deconstruct the idea that there might be a broader issue. So, with regards to have I seen, the question I was asked directly was, have I seen racism in my musical experience? I feel like that I have certainly experienced privilege in my musical experience as a white dude. I think that's probably pretty undeniable. I am, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'm reminded of long ago, Doc and I go way, way, way back, and we toured together early on, before we were even touring. We played shows together, and I remember Corey, Doc's drummer, God forbid, him and I up late one night drinking, as we would do back then, telling me, "You guys are going all the way, man." And I was like, "No, it's you guys, And he's like, "Come on, man." He's like, "You're the next Pantera." I was like, "I don't know, man. You guys are better players and a tighter band. I think it's you guys." And he was like, "Dude, there's only so far I can go in this thing." And for me to not even have my head wrapped around that part of the conversation before it was pointed out to me, sort of, it's lightning storm here, I don't know if you heard that, sort of, speaks to my experience. And me not having to be confronted with that idea. So that in itself, to me, is really, I would want to hear, not because I don't believe, but I don't really experience racism as a white dude. But I know that there's certainly privilege, and that's, to me, the most kind of shining example of when it was most glaringly pointed out.
Derrick, what would you say if somebody came to you and said, there is no racism in metal?
I would say that's completely ludicrous. I mean, absolutely there's racism in all walks of life. Again, it's what everyone else is saying. Unless you really experience it, then it's hard for you to really imagine that's happening. But it's consistently happening. It's been happening. The writing has been on the wall. I mean, you look at the history of this country. I've been spending many years outside of America, 20 years in Brazil. And there were people in complete denial there also that were not surrounded by the majority of people living in a bubble that were saying that there is no racism. It doesn't exist in Brazil, which is absolutely ludicrous. It exists in general, all around the world. There are people who are born that way or born into it. They're taught that way. And unfortunately, it does exist. And I've witnessed it, and I've had experiences with it, and it continues onward. I mean, it's not like something that's just appeared now because of all the things that have been going on. The writing has been on the wall for hundreds of years, so it's not really a surprise. It's just unfortunate that we have to have these type of conversations and go over it, to really communicate what's been going on, but it's important at the same time.
AJ, I'm really interested in your take on the idea that people say there is no racism in metal, because you have, in some of your, especially the acoustic sessions I've heard you doing, you're bringing other influences of other genres of music in as well. How do you feel like that's received?
The funny thing about it is, with my multicultural background and the way we express it through Fire from the Gods, it's been received well, but there's always this sort of hesitation when people when they want to brand us as to what type of band you are, and they'll do it and they'll say it's rap, it's reggae, it's not really rock because of the fact that I'm a black guy, and it's not because I'm a guy that's in a rock band. It's because, you have these influences. Yes, we have these influences, but we're just a rock band. But even to touch on the there is no racism in heavy music, it's just like a colorblind society. Like Doc said, it's a way to diminish someone else's experience because you haven't experienced it, so therefore it does not exist, and therefore it's a problem that I don't want to deal with. And that's really sometimes the outcome and where that sort of comment heads and why people say that. And I do understand what people might mean, because you go to a show, you see, especially here in the States, you see people of all sorts of racist backgrounds, genders, and it can seem as if this is such a homogenous community where everyone loves each other. But then, like Doc said, look at the comments on the God Forbid video. Look at the comments on the Fire from the Gods video. Those that aren't, look at the comments on the Sepultura videos when Derrick first took over. I mean, it was insane. And the nature, and I was still, not really in a band or touring at that point, but I was a fan, and you see, I looked up to Doc, I looked up to Derrick, I looked up to Lejeune from Seven Dust, so I saw what they went through, and I understood what that was, and I understood what I was going to go through as being a black guy in the band. But to touch again on the colorblind aspect, it's a way of just basically pushing it to the side and saying it's something I don't want to deal with. And unfortunately, what happened to George Floyd and where we are as a nation, where we are as a world, it's now at the forefront of the conversation again. It's imperative that we have this conversation so that we don't continue to make these mistakes, and so that we can finally realize a true homogenous, respectful community of heavy music fans and heavy music bands, where it's not like, oh, there's a black guy fronting a band, let me just label it as the black guy fronting a band, or there's a woman fronting a band, let me just label it as female fronted music. No, it's just music, and we're all just fans, and we're all just people that are drawn to the heaviness of metal music, and that's where the issue lies, in my opinion. That's why I think this conversation is hugely important. And it's been now 2 months we've been going back and forth with these type of panels and these talks, but I think it's still so imperative and important that we continue these conversations, because it's not going to end, and people have to wake up and realize that there are black brothers and sisters that are going to shows, there are Latinos that are going to shows that deserve your respect as such, and you don't have to be treated as some sort of pariah because of the color of your skin, and you have to think that, well, I have to assimilate and act a certain way because I don't want to be looked at as the black guy in the room, or the black woman in the room, or the black guy in the band. I want people to realize that I'm just a guy in a band, and I'm just a fan of heavy music, and I want to be in the room just as much as you do.
I think it's important what you said as well about people struggling to fit you in a box and trying to put you in all these other boxes, because at the end of the day, I think what metal needs to look at as a genre is how we'll quite quickly play a new metal band which has rapping, but then we will struggle if that rapping comes from a black person, because then we try and put it in another genre of music, whereas actually one is still metal and the other can still be metal, and it shouldn't be a race-led thing. One of the things that has come up a lot at the moment is the use of the N-word by artists, whether that be on stage or behind stage, and there's become this kind of cancel culture that's been brought up quite a few times in this conversation. Doc, you must have toured with so many bands, you must have heard this, I mean, in the UK, we don't really use that word. So I don't know. So I'm just saying the N-word.
I say it every day. I don't have to brush my teeth. Keeps my teeth white.
If anyone wants to say it, that's your prerogative. But for in the UK, it's not really the done thing as much. But how do you think,
when you say the N-word, do you mean like hard R or like EA?
Who me?
No.
I love saying hard R. I love it. I lean into it.
Saying it's not in the UK.
I want to talk with Randy from Lamb of God, and I went on tour, Mark. I met you years back, and I was on tour with Randy in that band, Halo of Locusts, and he was like, "Yo, this, that," and I was like, "Fam, relax." And he's also lived in Jamaica, so he had this like patois thing going on, and I'm like, "Fam, you gotta relax with that. We are in these weird places." He was like, "Yo, Doc says it all the time," and I've been on tour with Doc. Hey, what's my I'm like, "Oh man, here we go."
Yeah, Doc. Jersey. Represent. Hey, Sophie, go on. I wanna get.
Going back to you, Doc, there has been instances with white members of bands using the N-word with the hard R or not, and in some cases, like for example, The Ghost Inside, it's been like an instant cancel. Do you think that's the right way to approach that subject? And we're not talking down on any bands here, but what are your feelings on people having said that word historically and how it's being dealt with in the scene with cancel culture?
Okay, just 1 second. Mark just texted me. He said his power went out. Mark's power went out. He just texted me. So,
how convenient. Start getting deep into conversations.
We're using the
Mark
N-word.
peace out.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite subjects, and it goes way back with God forbid. We had a whole segment on our DVD about the N-word, because we were a band that used it liberally, because that's just how we talked amongst ourselves, and we grew up in an urban environment, and that's how everyone talked to each other. In New Jersey, it was like, if you were Puerto Rican, if you were Italian, if you were whatever, that's how everyone just talked to each other. It wasn't really tied to race. It was just tied to like street language to me, And so, but I do think a lot of people, other bands, right, who are mostly predominantly white bands, would kind of be around us and kind of siphon some of that. And maybe to a certain degree, I think there's maybe some irresponsibility of like giving people the card. Oh, I got the N-word card. God gave it to me. But to kind of zoom out, in general, my general philosophy about it is this: words are just sounds we make with our face. Okay, and I do think there is an element of when you create rules and you put boundaries on words or anything, it actually makes it more powerful. So I'll be honest. I think if you really want to get rid of the word, right? If that's your whole goal, like, because I get into arguments with my white girlfriend about this. She thinks she believes the exact opposite than me on this. Where I'm like, if you want to get rid of it, then black people have to stop using it, because you can't have it both ways. It can't be in every song, every stand-up comedy, and every movie, and it becomes this guarded piece of pop culture that is, it's like every Dave Chappelle punchline has the word in it, and every hook of the rap song has a hook in it, and then you tell white people not to say it. That's not how human beings work. So you can't have me. I go to the freedom aspect. I'm like, you know what? To me, it's all about context and meaning. How are you saying it? What's the feeling behind it? What is it meant to hurt, or am I using it colloquially to refer to my friends? And that's how I truly believe. But if you're going to say everyone should stop saying it, then everyone should. I don't like this Ice Cube going on Bill Maher's show being like, that's our word. We can say it, but you can't say it. I'm like, no, because to me, you're a hypocrite, And you're Mr. F the police. I thought you were all about freedom of speech. Now all of a sudden, now you want to stop those people's speech? You're a hypocrite. So that's just how I feel about it.
Derrick, I saw you nodding at parts of that. Would you say you agree with Doc's take there?
I definitely agree. I mean, as far as if you're going to tell certain people not to use the word, then you can't use it yourself. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You can't limit what people are going to say, and people don't want to be limited to what they're saying. So I mean, I grew up in a household where my mother was a teacher, and there was no way that I was taught to use that word. I never was taught to swear. Just the fact of how you want to present yourself as well. Do you want to be a black person using that word repeatedly, in front of people all the time, whether it be your peers or people who are white or whoever? I mean, how do you want to really communicate to other people? And if that's, word that you need to use in your vocabulary, then I think it puts you down, honestly. I think it makes you look very ignorant to use that word all the time. And anytime that I've seen people sort of in hip hop and everything, which I admire very much, and I'm a huge fan, it definitely takes a little step back. I know people like to believe that they're owning the word, and like if I own the word, then I'm not giving as much power that's there. But I don't know, if you really want to be heard, I think there's other ways of being able to present yourself. But again, I agree with Doc in the fact that there are people who grew up using that word, amongst friends, and it's very natural. It doesn't matter if you're white, Puerto Rican. It's just people just use it just from where you grew up, in your neighborhood, your environment. But at the same time, there's negative aspects of growing up in certain environments, and to own that and to realize that is something else. When you get out into a social situation of wanting to be heard and wanting to be respected, and you're going to be using that word, then I don't know, it takes away credibility from you, I believe, especially as a black person. So I have no problem with. I've been around a lot of people who grew up in like the crazy conditions and everything, and I never got offended by when they were saying, just because I knew their background, I knew where they came from, and they weren't saying it in any way to be offensive. But at the same time, I think it puts you in the light where it's, if you really want to be respected in what you're saying, and I think it's not necessary.
I think it's interesting, both your take, because I would say, and I don't know if this is an American UK thing, but I would say no, end, because if somebody uses that word, in my opinion, not only is there is the argument of, well, then maybe black people should stop using it too, but then in my opinion, there's also, I, as an individual, cannot stop people using that word. However, I do not want to be called that word, but I have no control. So in the sense that people, I think it was you, Doc, who was talking about empathy at the start. People maybe need to have empathy about who they're directing that word to, and whether it's going to be received, how it's going to be received. Because I know, with me personally, it's not going to go down well. Unless you're a black person from America, that I can understand, because it's used. But I've been called it by someone who was white in a nightclub once, and it didn't go down too well. We'll just say that much. So, Cammie, what's your opinion on cancel culture at the moment? Because there is this kind of attitude where a band does something, doom, out. You've got to be out. No explanation. See ya for the dust. What is your opinion on cancelling people over race issues?
I don't fully understand what cancel culture is, or what it, like, how it actually manifests fully. I think it's a strong public opinion and unity for people to discontinue their usage of a product and or entity. That I feel like it's not something new. It's something that's been like rebranded or given like a new name. People sign a petition, we're not going to buy Goya canned food anymore, or we're not going to listen to this band anymore. And then within an amount of time of that news kind of dying down, or people not knowing that they did that thing, then they'll go back to where they came from. Like, they'll amass back fans or people that it's kind of I feel like it's a temporary outspoken form of unity to be like, okay, we're anti this thing for a while. I think that people should be allowed to have the ability to not necessarily retract statements, but like apologize, learn something new, and be seen differently. I don't think the way that it's like somebody makes a mistake and now you're just written off. I think that that's kind of asinine. It's like, if someone can't be made an example for their growth, then I don't think it does anybody any good to then, it's like, we just cut them out and then what? It's just, it doesn't really seem like there's longevity to that approach.
AJ, how have you found it with so many bands in the rock world? Because I think all of us will have an experience with this. Since Black Lives Matter, we're seeing people's real opinions and where they really stand. how have you, because it has to be personal, because this music to all of us here isn't just a job. It's not just something we do. It's something we live, we breathe, we eat, we live for metal.
Right.
And so how do you find it when bands that you've admired and you like come out as anti-Black Lives Matter?
Well, that's their opinion, and the good thing about being in society where we pride ourselves on freedom of speech. Yes, I say yes, it's freedom of speech, but that doesn't give you freedom to be an arsehole. But being anti-Black Lives Matter, or being anti-protest, or being anti the movement, it's become extremely convoluted these days, and now you don't really know what people are against. It's like, are you against racism, or are you against police, or are you against the bands that are supporting it? What are you against? So really, there's really no platform for anyone to really stand on. Now, like we said, it's not just a black or white issue, it's what's right and what's wrong. And so if a band stands against something that I believe is right, then I'm not going to give them any support, because I feel the right and the wrong and being held accountable for our actions is really where the issue lies. It's not so much about, because people think, going back to how racism is viewed, people think that it's a kind of sticks and stones sort of thing. Like Doc said, it's a word. And people feel like, oh, so if I use this word, or if I say this against you, you shouldn't be offended. You're not allowed to be offended, because I have my right and my freedom of speech to say whatever I want to say. So you should not therefore be offended, and your offense to this is offensive to me. So again, it's this back and forth, like just this argument that gets, and so much is lost in translation. So I really now it's like, say what you want. And if someone wants to support that, and someone doesn't want to support Fire from the Gods or support me in my opposition to what they say, then c'est la vie. Because I've now, what happens with black people, I think, because of the PTSD and the stress and what we've dealt with on a scale outside of music, and obviously this is centered around music, being that we're musicians, but even outside of it, we tend to retreat into our blackness and to retreat into our, safe place amongst other black people, or amongst this idea that, you can't harm me because I'm proud and I'm strong about who I am, and I know who I am, and I'm black and I'm proud. But I think we kind of need to let go of that a little bit, because we need to educate people, and need for people to see that these things are not so much going to hurt us as much as you think it's going to hurt us. And from that, maybe you'll stop using the hard R to try and offend us. Like, if it's not really offending us, if we're not really taking it, and if we're not taking it and causing a huge stir about it, like the bass player from Ghost Inside, by saying what he did, should he have got cancelled? I'm not sure. I don't know what to say about that. I really don't have much of an opinion. Maybe you shouldn't have said it. You should have maybe tempered your words a bit. But I think we need to, like Cammie said, we need to allow people that redemption. We need to allow people. And part of that is letting go of these things that we feel are so offensive. And it pains me to think, okay, when Phil Anselmo, I don't like the way he talks, but you know what? I'm not going to disrespect him because of his art. I still appreciate him as one of the greatest metal singers of all time. And I still appreciate Pantera's music, and I'll still listen to it. So I'm not going to cancel him, but will I ever talk to him again or see him and be like, hey, that's my best mate and I respect him? Probably not. But once we let go of this retreating to our blackness and retreating to this place of being offended, I think it loses its power, and people lose that power to offend us.
I think as well, what you're saying, you're very right, but black and white people, we're all in this together. So when a cancel culture comes out, it isn't just black people doing it, it's white people doing it too. And so, Mark,
sometimes I feel it's more white people than black people.
Pardon?
Yeah, it is.
Sometimes I feel it's more white people than black people. It's like, why do you have to be offended on my behalf? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, let me be offended and let me speak up for myself. Let me have my own opinion about it. And if I don't say something, it's like with the Tommy situation, not to put Doc out there. Everyone wants to ask me, what do you think about what Tommy said? I don't give a shit what Tommy said. I mean, I find it comical, but you know what? It doesn't offend me. I find it comical to say the least, but it doesn't offend me. And I'm not going to sit here and allow you and allow you to tell me that you're black, you have to speak up about this. No, I'm going to speak up about it because I genuinely feel I need to say something about it, or I genuinely feel that people need to be aware of how that damages and how dangerous it can be. But on the flip side, cancel culture is extremely dangerous because it takes away the basic, our basic right to just be who we are and be free. And art is supposed to be about being free and expressing yourself.
So you believe that, because one of the things that I would say is that from what I've seen speaking to people who are white and wanting to be allies, it's a very, very confusing place to be, because like 1 minute you're like, I want to stand on this side and defend black people, but then it's like, should I be doing this? And I think it's kind of scary. Plus you add the word racism in there, and it gets such a visceral response of, oh my God, I'm not a racist. Mark, I'm going to ask you here. Do you think it's really hard to be an ally?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. So, I want to kind of maybe build off a little bit of where the conversation was before you brought it to me. And I think this kind of cancel culture, what it does, besides, as was pointed out, which is kind of restricting someone's right to have an opinion or, independent free thought, is it restricts a dialogue. And I feel like we've gotten just kind of globally in this thing where there's very little dialogue and there's just more like planting stakes in the ground. And so for me, when, I live in Southeast Virginia, I look like I look, I live out in the country, and I come across people on a daily basis that believe things or have tendencies that I think maybe, aren't where we should be. And what I find in my experience is that most people don't think they're racist. And there's, some people do, and those are easy to spot. And it's like, what do you do with that? Not much, you know what I mean? But a lot of the thing is that people don't acknowledge that they're advantaged or that there's privilege. So when I talk to someone, I try and say, can we get to this basic, when I'm talking about it, I don't talk about it all the time, but can we get to this basic premise that we acknowledge that you have an advantage by being born white in America? Can you at least kind of acknowledge that? And then,
Can you go further on that? Because I think that is something, I think just by saying that, I can already hear people's fingers on the keyboard going, don't you tell me I'm privileged.
Yes, sure. And because people take their individual experience. But I grew up in a trailer park, and my dad wasn't around, and I had to drop out of school at 16 to help pay the bills, and I didn't get to go to college, and and so my experience is not one of privilege. I'm not talking about myself, but you know what I'm saying. But, we have to look at a bigger picture. Of course, not every white person in America grew up in, privileged and easy, of course. But we have to look, but that's when we talk about the bigger picture. And if we can identify that you have an advantage being born white in America, then that's a starting place. And then let's say why. And then we can start talking about why. And if it's right that it should be that way. And then we get into creative ways about how to undo that if we can agree that that's not how the hell it should be, right? So most people have a problem extracting their own personal experience from the greater experience of what's going on. And I think that to me is a big disconnect. And then what happens is you say, because I didn't have everything handed to me, then you dig your heels in because what do you mean I'm privileged? And this becomes this kind of fear-based thing where people, what are you going to take away from me? If you want more, what are you taking from me? And that's where this kind of that's where it just grinds to a screeching halt. I think until probably the keyboard warriors will probably go at me for this, but
it's all right, we're all offline here.
I think until white America becomes as invested in Black America doing well as Black America has been in white America doing well historically, until that happens, we're going to have an issue. Like, we all have to be kind of realize that we're in this together, and when we all do better, we all do better. And someone having access to simple things like justice and opportunity doesn't take away my access to that.
I think one of the things that you said that really resonates with me, and I think a lot of people need to understand that, is, so I can only speak from my experiences. I'm not American, but I am English. Yes, I am black or mixed, however you want to describe me, but I'm English. Yes, I have roots in Africa. I also have roots in Poland, have all sorts of different roots, but I was born here. This is my culture, and I don't have a home to go back to, because this is my home. This is my home. Now, Derrick, one of the things I think that comes up a lot within metal especially is the use of the Confederate flag. Where do you stand on that? Because that has been a really difficult conversation for the metal community to have.
Ask the Southerner.
We'll come to you.
Well, me and Mark have talked about this stuff pretty at length, personally.
And I would say, and I don't want to jump on Derrick. I would say my opinion has evolved on that, but please go.
My father was born in Georgia, and so I was always going to the South. I was born in Cleveland. My mother was from the North. And the reason why I say like North and South, because it was really like that for them. And also my dad grew up in a time when there were black water fountains, white water fountain, black bathroom, white bathroom. He went through that. And so he was extremely the friendliest person. That's actually his name is Friendly. And, I never saw him angry or lash out in any way in a violent manner towards any human being in my entire life. The same with my brother. I can't say the same for myself, but I like to learn from them. But it's always something that I felt that it's really not so important to me right now. I think it really steers away from the serious issue of people voting. I think for me, this is like to really keep the focus on this, especially in America. I think it's important for all Americans, especially Black Americans, to really stay focused and showing their voice through voting. And I think there's a lot of other things, just like statues and flags and things that I don't believe in. I think they're pretty bad. But I don't think that they're really the importance. It's frustrating because I see a lot of attention going towards that, where I think the attention should be definitely set on keeping the eye on the prize and really getting everyone registered to vote, making sure that everyone's available, have the ability to vote, and showing the importance of it. I mean, the flag there's no debate about it. The person who designed the flag, it was designed for, the idea of showing the supremacy, yes, it was no doubt that was the purpose of it. I mean, the whole idea of the Confederacy, there was a lot of plans that a lot of people have no idea about that actually existed, and they were actually written out as far as like a plan, like, okay, once we have this control of the U.S., it's like we're going to move forward into South America and continue this growth and being able to have all this land and area in order to conquer. That was like in the future plan. But I think, flags, I'm a huge fan of flags, actually. I'm pretty knowledgeable about all the flags around the world. I can probably name every single one and go into a little detail of each flag. But that flag in particular is definitely, it's a flag that I understand there's a lot of history tied into it with people, because there are brothers fighting against brothers and families fighting against families and things like that. But it really sets off a horrible alarm for a lot of people. It's not like you can go around Germany and waving like a Nazi flag around and say, hey, that was a part of our history, like we were all fighting. Some of us were, fighting harder than others, but, this is a part of our history and you can't wave that flag around at all. It's like, it's actually illegal, against the law. They made it very clear, and to really steer away from that. I mean, the whole idea of the reason why that word, in my mind, and I believe throughout history that it actually existed, was because it was a fight against slavery or for slavery. So, I mean, it was economically, it has something to, but the main thing was about slavery. It was such, so that's a representation of it for me. It always has been.
If we go back to Mark, because I know when that question came out, everyone all went, whoop, and Mark was there waving. Mark, that flag, as we all know, often when I think of things, and I don't know your opinion yet, but often when I think of things and issues like that, I don't think about the whole and all of the people. I always think about one sole black rock fan walking into an all-white gig. And because I, for many years, I was the only black person at your gigs, for example, and so I know what that feels like. But then to see a symbol like that tells me that I'm not welcome there. So what is your opinion on the use of the Confederate flag at a gig?
Yeah, it's evolved over the course of my life. I've grown up in Virginia. I live in rural Virginia, as I said earlier. I'm everything that means, right? So a lot of people who to this day fly that flag will tell you that they're not racist. And growing up, Doc, I missed it. I missed Doc's take earlier because my power went out and I had to jump back on. But, growing up where you grow up has a lot to do with, how your sort of views and perspectives are shaped, right? Absolutely. And growing up here, there is a lifestyle, there's a pulse to being in the Southeast. There's a pulse to being around all this history. There's a pace of life. There's beauty. There's Southern culture, which is something that I so identify with, so much of it. And I think a lot of people, when they drop that flag, that's what it means to them. But my thing on it is this, knowing that might mean that to you, but there's a lot of people that the very sight of that brings anger and resentment and pain, and fear. Thank you. And so for that alone is enough for me to put it away. Like, I can fly a Virginia flag if I want to fly a flag, and I don't think that, if that offends you, let's sit down and talk about why. You know what I mean? But to me, it's just simple. Just put it away, because it's bringing pain and fear and resentment to people. You're talking to a guy that has a four-wheel drive truck out in the driveway with mud tires on it and driving down the right road. Freebird can come on and I'll cry. You know what I mean? But put the damn flag away. Just put it away, because it's like it's bringing up this. It's not worth all that, man. Unless you really mean like South Rise again and everything that means, and then we don't really have much to talk about. But it should be worth, in my opinion, it should be worth just relieving that anxiety and that tension and that anger over a flag. Come on, man.
I just wanted to say one thing. I mean, there's definitely a lot of symbols of Southern culture that can be represented other than that flag. Yeah. So I just think there's just better ways of showing that, and that are universal, that my friends that are black can, there's plenty of Southern pride among black people in the South. Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
I went to Georgia, and I was in Atlanta last month and went to a anti-Confederate statue and flag protest. And I had gone just to observe, not to really participate. But I had asked the organizer, as she was, speaking to the crowd, I said, why do you think these people are willing to defend this flag, these statues? What do you think it means to them? Because I understand what it means to you, because I can identify with that, being black. She says, were you educated in Georgia? I said, no, obviously not. But she's like, okay. The history books have been twisted and revised in order to support an affinity for that flag and support an affinity and a reasoning behind the statues, and kind of shifting the focus of the Civil War from slavery and evolving around slavery and all the issues and what it subsequently meant to the makeup of the United States and to history. So I understand that. But if it's built on a falsehood, if it's built on some sort of manipulation of the facts, then there's really no validity to having this flag or to having the statues. I'm not going to argue. Like Mark said, there are plenty other symbols. I lived in Virginia for years, so I understand that. I used to see the stickers, the hate versus heritage thing. This is not hate, this is heritage. And I understood that. And I get where he's coming from. But there's so much more that people can agree upon as black and white Southerners, and even as black and white Americans. Like this is our shared history. The same people that fought and bled in that Civil War. There were blacks, there were white people, there were people from all over the world that were involved in this conflict, and who would subsequently affect it. So I think the flag issue is, again, just, is it really worth all that drama? Is it really worth this conversation? And I also agree with Derrick that it shifts the focus a lot, because a lot of American politics and social issues now seem to be this, let's push this here and let's talk about that rather than let's talk about this. And so I think we really should come off the flag thing. I get it. The statue thing, I get it. But there are other pressing issues like educational reform, prison reform, infrastructure, how we exist in the global community and how we're viewed in the global community. I think those things are a lot more important than the flag. When you go to a metal show and metal fans can just be about, we're about the music, man, we don't give a shit. It's like, so I get that as well, but at the same time, be a little bit more kind to the people and be a little bit more understanding to the people that you're sharing this world with and sharing this experience at a metal show with. Don't be a racist. Don't be a piece of shit.
Metal fans also, I think we all know this, metal fans just need to chill out a little bit sometimes, because sometimes they're like, oh, why are you singing about politics? Then if you write a love song, they're like, oh, why are you doing a love song? You've gone soft. And they just basically want what they individually want, and sometimes a respect for the art needs to happen. But what I'm going to do is I've got one more question to ask for Cammie and Doc, and then I'm going to ask everybody about where we go going forward, because I think we've spoken about a bit of history there with America, and I think to any British fans watching this right now, it's very important that we recognise that our history's been swept under the rug. Like, we were the ones trading slaves, but we've swept that under the rug. We don't teach it in schools. We don't talk about it in the UK. And so a lot of people in the UK will go, oh yeah, America's got it really bad, but we need to look at our issues too. And one of the biggest ones being systemic racism within the police. And I feel that in the UK, again, we're very British, and we won't talk about that. That's a little bit awkward. But I feel that in America, and I'm going to ask Doc and Cammie about this. Doc, is there a fear in criticising authority figures in America?
No, I mean, we're at the heart, Americans are rebellious in nature. I mean, we're a country that's built on revolution. We're a country that's built on kind of the intrepid pioneer spirit. And, look, there's reason why our COVID numbers are going through the roof, because everyone thinks they're, a rebel, and they want to, I'm not going to let the government's boot be on my chest, So no, I don't think that's the case.
From the UK perspective, I think what we see a lot of the time is, and I'm fully aware I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, so I'm sorry, America, but from our perspective, it seems to be that praise the military, don't look after the vets as much.
I mean, hero worship.
It's like hero worship. It's like there's a fear and people are saying, the police are right, and there seems to be people who are stuck in this mentality of protect the police no matter what.
No, I mean, I think it's way more. I think it's way more complex than that. I think these are partisan issues, right? So essentially, what's happened is that one side of the political spectrum has politicized. Say, we own the military, we own the police, that's our people. But the same people will be like, well, the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, they're the deep state, and we hate them, but then we love these people. And it's like, but they're like, also, we hate the government, and we want small government, but we love the military, the police, who are actually the arm of the kind of the
arm of it.
Yeah, they're the fist of the government. So it's kind of reductive, and it's selective, and it doesn't really capture the big picture. I mean, if I could really kind of talk about this issue from my perspective, I think in many ways, because I've been involved in this stuff, but I'm not completely like, I support the protest movement, but I'm also a bit more analytical than I think a lot of people on that side of things. And to me, just blaming physically the police for the situation is missing the point. It's like thinking that if you wanted to get rid of drugs in America, all you gotta do is arrest all the street dealers on the corners. And it's just not the truth. The truth is, if you want to fix the issues we have, you have to start with systems. You have to start with laws. You have to change. You have to stop the drug war. You have to decriminalize a lot of these situations. You have to, the police are just human beings, and their results, the way they act, they don't have the power to say, don't do this, do that. They're being told what to do. So you can't just say, oh, the police suck. No, they're just people. And I'm sure every police making a broad stroke about any group, saying, oh, this one group, they're all the same. No, that's just stereotyping. Every person is their own person. And I think...
But do you not think a certain type of person, in the same way that at a metal show, I've seen loads of doormen or bouncers punching out metal kids because they're crowd surfing, do you not think a certain type of person who's addicted to power?
Yeah, but I don't think it's one. I don't think it's every person. I think it's I think one thing. I think uniforms matter. Like this. That's the symbolism of wearing uniform and then being in a group, and it kind of diffuses you of personal responsibility. I think there's a lot to that, and I think that goes across police, military, anything like that. But right now we're in a culture war. Where if think about it, and like I said, this is what I said about the limitations of empathy, right? If you have one group of people saying police are evil, and if you're a police officer, then it's a war. Then it's like, oh, you don't like me?
I'll be right back. Okay. Sorry.
Then it goes, oh, you don't like me? Well, then okay, then I don't like you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, you actually, by telling someone that they suck and they're terrible and you're the worst, it doesn't make them want to be on your side, and you antagonize them, and it emboldens them and makes them feel even more like the aggressor.
Especially if they have guns. I mean,
yeah.
That makes a big difference, because obviously we don't have guns over here in the UK, really. Cammie, what's your take on this kind of... And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's something I've seen consistently in comments when I'm looking through about Black Lives Matter. A lot of people just don't understand why it's happening, because they believe that if you're well behaved, then the police will be well behaved with you.
I think that there's not a fear about questioning authority, that there's a resistance to questioning authority. There's definitely a trend, it's psychologically backed through case studies and everything else, that people put in positions of authority dramatically change their characteristics towards other people who they view as beneath their level of authority. I think resoundingly there are definite personalities that are attracted to becoming police, especially with the boundaries or lack of boundaries that are applied to them. I think you could name let's say I think all the cops that I know would be friends with all the cops that my friends know, and it would be like, yes. And would I make that assumption with other grouping? Like, do I think all the nurses that I know would be friends with the other nurses? And it would be like, no. That I do subscribe more so to the broader stereotypical outlook that there are good cops but they definitely are not upholding bad cops' behavior or holding them responsible for that behavior, thus making them bad cops too. I think that there's definitely like a disparity in their training, in how they treat people and how they approach people. That is unanimously something like corrupt within that system, and how it's put into place. That I agree with Doc that like the people need to vote for who their district attorney is or who their chief of police is, and that trickles down. But I think that the checks and balances within a good number of police departments are not in place and are not being they're definitely not allocated appropriately.
Yeah.
I agree.
Can I speak on that for a second?
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump off of that and say, I think that, you hear a lot right now about defund the police and, as was brought up, training issues. And to me, this is just my opinion, but I think it might be a vetting issue more than it is a training issue or a funding issue. I think, clearly there are bad cops, and the point is well taken that if you're a good cop and you see someone being a bad cop and you don't do anything about it, well, maybe you're a bad cop. But I think, to just kind of by and large, throw this broad stroke over it, that the type of person that wants to be a cop is probably this type of person. I don't know that that's fair to say, but I think it is the responsibility of departments to really maybe take, clearly we're seeing the consequences of bad cops stack up. So, maybe a solution is to get a little more stringent on psychological evaluations and educational requirements, and perhaps training for the types of people that are candidates to become officers. And if we make it, if we make the cut a little harder to make, then perhaps the performance and the type of policing that we see will improve. It has to improve, and that's just, to me, one way that we might look at doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
One of the things I can clearly say is, having been in America, the way the police, in the UK, yes, the police, there is systemic racism. Yes, there are, black people are more affected by that systemic racism. But in America, the way I was spoken to consistently by the police, I saw as a massive issue, especially the way I was treated until I spoke. And they were like, oh, she's English, that's okay. I think, I don't know if that could even be spotted. That kind of behavior, I think that is such an ingrained prejudice within their brains.
I agree. I think to clarify, I don't think that bad people seek to become like there are certain characteristics that aren't inherently bad. Like all sociopaths are not serial killers. There are a lot of functioning everyday societal people who are sociopaths. There are different variables that create. There are different variables that create them becoming negative. And I think that I doubt that anyone who doesn't like having authority becomes a cop. I doubt that anybody that is afraid of confrontation becomes a cop. Like there are certain characteristics that you are going to have to even put yourself in that position. That I think within getting in that position, you can be a completely upstanding, like Boy Scout level character, but you get in that position, you get lack of training, you get whatever corruption of people cutting corners to show you how different things happen, and then you get the stress of that poor training being out in the field. It's like how many people have been put in any kind of position whether you're working front desk or the kitchen somewhere, that you're released to do your duties far before you're ready. How anxious are you? How nervous are you? And what do you resort back to? You're not thinking like, well, I know how to handle myself, and then you add in all the societal issues and you give them a gun, and now what? And it's like, I think vetting is important, but training is equally important. It's like the people, you can take good people and ruin them by not giving them enough training and then putting them into situations that are only going to validate their biases. And then whether they are good or not doesn't matter if we're ultimately kind of maneuvering into a position to end up corrupt or be bad themselves.
I think what I've heard from everybody speaking on this issue so far is that there needs to be accountability at all stages, from hiring to first going out onto the streets to the whole way through. The police need to be supported. They need to be monitored to stop the issues that are happening within the US and across the world. I think one of the things that's come up time and time again, and I've heard everyone say it in their own way, which is really nice, is a sense of empathy. This talk is one of the first talks I've seen that hasn't become, well, the white man's done this, well, the black man's done this. It hasn't become two sides. It's metal united. Now, I'm going to start with you, Derrick, and move around and ask everybody the same thing. What would you like to see going forward? What do you think metal needs to reduce the racism within our scene, to make it a safer space for everybody?
I guess that freedom that everyone would be able to speak their mind, and to actually have people listen is really important as well. Whatever side you're on, it's really important that people are able to listen to each other respectfully, whether they agree or not. That has to take place. A lot of times people get cut off and not able to explain how they feel and what's going on with them. So that respect is important, and it's necessary. But the communication, just so we know not to make the same mistakes, and just people really steering away from all the ignorant stereotypes that exist surrounding music and certain things like that. I know it's really hard to get people out of that mindset because it's very strong and very relevant, from all sides. It had something to, I remember growing up and just being bombarded by black people for having dreadlocks, for listening to heavy music, and just that ignorance of know where rock and roll came from and electric guitar. They're like, why would you like music with there's white people playing the electric guitar? And it was just, I don't even know how to answer that. It's just like, well, let me just show you this book of history of rock and roll. And just to really get rid of all those stereotypes, to people just feel very comfortable in order to say how they feel. A lot of times people feel that they're going to be attacked for having an opinion. But again, it's the environment. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily mean they're a racist. I don't think everyone's a racist if they have a Confederate flag or if they say the N-word or anything like that. It's just, I think it's just that ability to be able to listen and communicate and come to agreement to move forward is extremely important.
Doc, what would you say is the thing that you would like to see? Because I know you spoke about empathy before, and I think that's very important.
Listen, I would, in some respects, I would kind of even question the question in a lot of ways, because for me, I can't say my experience in the metal scene or I came up in the hardcore scene, which to me was all about inclusivity and diversity and not only just of it was racial issues. It was these guys were vegan over here and these people were Hare Krishna over here, and there's the tough guys and here's the emo kids and here's the grindcore. It was all about this mishmash. So that was my entry point, and then I got into the actual metal scene around America and the rest of the world, which, like I said, is to some degree we have to acknowledge that traditional heavy metal is kind of European in its culture, and that's just kind of inherent to what it is. And so in many ways, I think what's actually more, and a lot of it is not that there's general racism. I think there are definitely, you can go to certain sects of maybe the black metal scene where they're definitively white nationalists and things like that we can look at. But I think generally most of the culture of heavy metal fans, at least in America and Europe, they're just sheltered white kids who, not that they don't like black people, they're just not around them. You know what I'm saying? They're just not, they don't have the exposure. So in a lot of ways, it's a lack of maybe cultural vocabulary, But I think the thing that's actually more interesting to me about the whole thing is that people that aren't white coming into the culture is that we're the outlier from our traditional culture and race.
You don't feel like with artists like Lil Uzi Vert, with Astro World, with Travis Scott putting on Marilyn Manson, there is a lot of that.
Yeah, listen, I think there are elements of that. There are elements of that, but I think, I would just love to get to, because I think we probably all experience being pariahs to a certain degree within our traditional, our background and stuff. So that's something where, I would hope that evolution moves forward just well, because I think that will create, you know what I'm saying, where you kind of solve the issue and create connections on both ends. You know what I'm saying? Because like I said, if some of my favorite bands, it's like Amon Amarth and Arch Enemy and At the Gates, it's like Scandinavian, and I love it. I don't want that to be any different than what that is. You know what I'm saying? And there's a cultural element there, so it's this. I just want more fusion on both sides. If that makes sense.
I think what I hear, that 100% makes sense, because what I hear you saying is something that I say all the time, is the industries within rock need to look at themselves, which bands they're signing, what they're representing, and what they're showing the rock fan, what bands they're showing them and who they're representing, because it can be harder for upcoming bands of certain skin tones because they're put into the rap category.
Well, I heard the original drummer of Judas Priest was a black dude, with an afro. Straight up, I seen the pictures.
I knew it.
Cammie, what would you like to see going forward happening in metal? What kind of changes?
I mean, I guess it's like, it would be so nice to just be like seen and treated as an individual without all the qualifiers that come with what people like see first. So it's like, it's black, and now it's a black woman, and it's like all these assumptions just roll in, and I feel like just block me out as a person and what I'm like contributing to what it is that I'm doing. It's like I came from a home that didn't ingrain me with a heavy metal foundation. It's like I have a gospel background or a blues background, but it's like in me infusing that in metal doesn't detract from metal. It's like I would love to see less defensiveness in people's like perspective, like more open-mindedness towards just those infusions, I guess, and seeing what people contribute and why they contribute it versus just, it's like defensiveness is never a constructive emotion. It's never a constructive response. That it's like, just take people at face value, take them for what they're contributing. You like it or you don't, and you move on. It doesn't need to become this whole like guarding of the gatekeeping for a thing that was so like a hodgepodge of stuff to begin with. It's like music of all things is always going to evolve, and this resistance to it, like it's not going to take anybody anywhere.
And AJ, what would you say going forward is the thing that would be like, this needs to change in metal, or I'd like to see this?
To touch a bit on what Cammie said, and from my own experience, I don't want to be treated as a novelty anymore. I don't like being treated as, there's this band and it's fronted by a black guy. Oh, you're a black fronted band. Oh, you're a rapper. Oh, you're a singer. Oh, you folks in Jamaican. Oh my gosh! And
is that by press or by audiences? When you say that, are you saying when you say you don't want to be treated as a novelty, are you saying by the audience or by the press?
By the industry, by the audience, by the industry. I don't like it to be. It singles me out, and again, it takes away from, like Cammie said, it takes away from the person I am, and I think it detracts from the message, because Fire from the Gods and who I am, my music's about the message, and we're not a band that's about, we're not writing about love or these things. We have a message that's universal that we want everyone to understand, but because I'm black, it tends to be, that's something that a black guy would say, you're a bit more revolutionary than this other band. But I'm not saying the same thing. I'm saying the same thing that Highly Suspect saying. I'm saying the same thing that bands that are just full white guys are saying, or a band that, aren't black, that don't have a black presence.
Mark, what would you say you'd like to see going forward? Because this is obviously, the fact that you're even here in this group of people it's important, to hear your voice and what you want to see.
I would say, I would kind of, first off, Mark is way blacker than I am. So I want to keep it real. Like, this dude is, what I'm saying, he's the real deal, all right? He ain't messing around.
I don't know what that means.
He's just white on the outside.
You don't have to answer that, Mark.
I'm not sure what that means.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. You got the soul or something. It's in him. It's in him. You know what I'm saying?
Doc and I have over the years gotten into some pretty intense and deep conversations, and it's always a thrill, and
it's a feeling.
And go ahead.
It was, for me personally, I was really excited to hear that you were going to be on the call, because it's got to the point now with a lot of my friends where they're just so scared to talk about race that they're like, oh, I'm so scared to say something wrong, I'm not going to talk to any of my black friends about it because I might put my foot in it. And I just love the fact that you were like, yeah, I feel strong enough about this to get on this call and get stuck in.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege to be included, and I appreciate being asked to be involved. I think what you brought up, Sophie, leads to kind of what I would like to see change, is that I think that we can't be scared to ask questions, and we can't just like throw a wall up because someone says something. Obviously there are limits, and I kind of touched on this earlier. Sometimes someone is just so outrageous or so beyond reason that you just can't really engage, right? But I think most people, we all more or less want the same things. You know what I mean? And when you talk about it in the context of metal or music in general, we're here because we're artists and we want to make our music and we want to create, and we feel the joy when it reacts with somebody else, when someone else embraces our work, and that's why we're all here. It doesn't have anything to do with whether I'm white or you're black. It's we're artists, we're creative, right? And we have a community, and that's part of our community as well. I love what was said about no longer being an anomaly. I think people don't really scratch their head when they see a white kid that listens to primarily hip hop. It's not really something that throws anybody off, but we're still at a place where if you're a black kid and your favorite band is Lamb of God or Bad Wolves or whatever, it's like, oh wow, you're into hard rock music or Sepultura. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh wow, you're into, that's weird, and no one thinks that if you're a white kid and you like, A$AP Rocky or something. So it's, I think that, I'd like to see that change, man. And I'd like to see us get to a point, and things are so volatile right now, and people are so passionate about what they believe, and that's a good thing. But when that passion becomes so strong that it overwhelms your ability to listen, I think then it becomes a negative. And that can be difficult sometimes because, you feel so strongly about something, and it's so easy to say, if you voted for Trump, you're part of the problem. Instead of saying like, why did you do that? And why would you want to do that again? Tell me, what appeals to you about that? And just trying to understand someone else's point of view. Even if you don't agree with it, that can be okay too. That's how we grow. I mean, if we all sit here and parrot each other and high five the same, the same statements and the same ideas, we're not going to get anywhere. That doesn't mean it excuses people that are out of line or out of pocket or just way out of, just dead wrong. But it's finding the space in between that and being more inclusive instead of weeding people out. It's difficult to do. It's difficult to do as an individual sometimes. So it's, amplified more, exponentially more difficult to do, I think, as a society. But we got to start somewhere, man. I think, still as people, I think we still all have more in common than we do, than we have to disagree about. And for whatever reason, a million reasons we could talk another hour and a half about, we seem to focus on the differences and what's dividing us, and it just kind of pulls us further apart. This is all easy to talk about, harder to do. So that's what I'd like to see change, is to see people not be scared to ask questions and not be scared to hear answers, and then try and figure out where we can come together instead of throwing the spotlight on, where we're not.
I think one of the things that has come up time and time again from everyone here is the word empathy and understanding each other, and something else to reiterate that you said there, Mark, was the word community. I don't think anyone gets into metal. It's not something you pick up on a whim. It's not something you I'm kind of into metal. It's literally something most of us have covered our bodies. We've made our statement that we are metalheads until the end, because this is who I am. It's my identity, not just music I listen to. And That's whether you're black, that's whether you're white, that doesn't matter where you're from. Metal should be a community, accepting everyone. So thank you to everybody. Is there anything that anyone wants to add, or that you're like, we didn't touch on this?
I mean, can I say something? I don't know if it
I knew you had something, Doc. I knew you had something. That's why I love you, because you always got something.
This is like a self-reflective question I'm kind of asking everyone, and I just wonder, like, do any of you guys think things like this, like even having we're going to get the collection of black musicians, does this help exacerbate the, like something AJ brought up about saying, like, I don't want to be known as just the black guy or just this. Like, do you guys think this makes it more that we're going to be seen that way, or less? Like, should we, like, what I'm saying is the solution, like, don't talk about race, or yes, talk about race, or put ourselves out there as, like, the spokesman for these issues? Like, I'm saying that not in a critical way. Like, I'm in a general, like, I don't know what the right answer is. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
And are we preaching to the choir here?
Yeah, I don't know.
So I thought about this because I think this has been I had to make a decision about whether I wanted to get involved in this or not. And what I would say, personally, is that it's very rare that you hear black voices within metal in a place where it's being received by someone who can hear it, in the sense that it's like when I did an International Women's Day piece, and it's very rare you get women asking women questions. And so therefore the questions about women have come from men, so then something gets lost in translation. And so then when trying to communicate that to men, they don't get to hear it in the way that women would like it to be heard. And I think the reason it's important to have people with shared experiences and opinions is because it can be heard from the right perspective. And you're not afraid to say the things that you might want to say. That's my point. Does anyone else got anything to add? Cammie, I see you're nodding.
I agree. I feel like it's a little bit of like a double-edged sword. You don't want to necessarily make yourself stand out, but you have to like stand out to make that point. But personally, it's like I find it helpful. That I often feel outnumbered as a woman and as a black woman. So at least one of the categories, it's refreshing to be able to have a dialogue with other black metal artists. That I think it provides a place for the viewers to that what will watch this to like have a safe space to listen and to like she was saying, to receive this message and these ideas and feel like they're a part of the conversation without it being so overcrowded with a lot of other things. But it's like I don't know when it dissipates. It's like Doc saying it. I don't really know when it helps. When I first got into Oceans of Slumber, I was very resistant to pointing out or being involved in anything that was like very Afrocentric or driven, or like this is going to be about you being black. I was like, I don't want to draw attention to that. I don't want it to stand out any more than it already stands out. I want it to just be about my music. But as things have changed, as the landscape's changed, as people's reception of us has changed, my attitude towards it right now is that for the issues that are pinpointed on me, like I do have to talk about them, and I have to talk about how my experience has been unique, because I think for the other black metalheads, they might need to hear it. It's a very isolating, literally and figuratively, like time right now.
Can I ask a question? Doc, you go first. You said
no. I'm good.
I want to say something and to answer Doc's question about being self-reflective. Since the whole George Floyd thing started and the questions and matters of race have taken the forefront, and done so many interviews and been a part of so many panels and discussions and all that, it's been extremely therapeutic for me, because for a very long time, like even not being in a band or going to shows, I've always felt like this outcast in certain ways. Growing up in New York City and being at hardcore shows and stuff like that, yeah, you see other black kids, you see other Latino kids, and that's a bit more homogenous and a bit more, like you said, it's built on community, and a lot of that is because it's from urban centers in America where you find a lot of different people. But when you go to metal shows and you when I started going to shows in Virginia and it was just all white kids and they were listening to Lamb of God, or we were just all about Kill Switch Engage, which at the time had a black frontman, but there weren't other black kids at the shows, so it felt like I couldn't speak up about it. And when people asked you about questions of race, and when people would say the N-word around you, they give you this kind of look like, you better not say anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to just say this and I'm going to be me and you're going to have to deal with it. Or they'll make the token black guy jokes and stuff like that. And you always kind of feel so isolated in that, and you feel like I can't say anything because I don't want them to not accept me. But what's been, now that I'm a bit more older and a bit more mature and, Fire from the Gods is getting a bit more recognition, I feel, that it's my duty to say something, but I don't want it to stand out and be like, okay, I'm having this conversation just because I'm black. I'm part of this conversation just because I'm a guy from, that has this different, this very multicultural background that can speak on these things. I just want it to be about my music, but it has been very therapeutic to be able to get off my chest and be involved in these and say what I have to say. And hopefully, it will help like kids that are listening to it and black metalheads and stuff like that go to shows and and empower them a bit to, not necessarily just speak up for themselves, but be proud of who they are. Because it was hard being a black kid in a black family because they look at you like you're funny. Like Doc said, you're the pariah. So you're in this kind of middle ground and this middle place where you're not too accepted by the white kids, or you have that issue where you're not black enough for black people and you're not white enough for white people, some sort of thing. But I think it's been very therapeutic again for me, and I think it's really helping because as I've been speaking up more, I've been seeing a lot more white people and a lot more friends of mine in the metal community that are like, we hear you, bro, we understand. And that's been extremely reassuring.
That's nice. Mark, were you about to say?
Yeah, I had a question because the question was asked, like, what would we like to see change or what would we like to see happen? And that's a very valid and interesting question. And it brought the question up in me is like, the sort of basis of this conversation was we are within this metal community, all of us. What can we do as a community to make those changes happen? What can we do together as members of this, like I just said, members of this metal community? What kind of steps can we take? What can we keep in mind and walk away from this as something that we can actually practically apply to try and make a difference and try and make things feel more inclusive and more welcoming?
One of the things that I said to Loudwire when we first started doing this is I said that by the end of this, what I'm hoping for is there's a lot of metal fans in the world who, when they're in a mosh pit, Lamb of God mosh pit, kid falls over, black kid, they reach out their arm, they pick him up. Cool. But when they're out of that festival, when they're in their day-to-day, the way they react to that same black kid walking down the street, maybe people will start to reflect on their own behavior.
Like sort of check themselves.
Because I think a lot of people, as someone said before, they don't see themselves as racist. Because they're like, I never use the N-word. I've worked hard for everything I've got. I've never had, I'm always nice to Black Fred down at the pub. And they don't realise that a lot of their day-to-day actions can be racist and playing into this systemic racism, whether it's little comments like microaggressions of where are you from? No, where are you really from? Or so people need to start looking at themselves and what they're accepting and what's happening in the world right now. I don't know if anyone else feels that way.
Yeah. Definitely.
I think to say something about what Mark was saying, and this is very, very difficult because it's an industry thing, but before the battle lines were drawn in between bands, and before there was like this, everyone became entrenched in what they liked and the subgenres and stuff. There seemed to be a bit more community amongst bands. Like everyone was touring with each other, everyone were going to the same shows, and then it kind of, you know, splintered off a bit, and then you enter the issue of racism, and then you add more division to the mix. So then you start to, you know, you start to just rally around what you think, you know, what sort of bands reflect your particular viewpoints. But, you know, I think being a bit more open and the scene being a bit more communal and going to shows and everyone participating, and bands that wouldn't normally tour with each other might need to tour with each other just to kind of open it up just a little bit more and get people on the same page again. Go back to the Ozfest days when the bill was extremely diversified, instead of having these bills that are only catered to this one particular scene. And, you know, I know, and I'm not saying like, I'm Fire from the Gods ain't gonna play Varkenfest, but you know, there's other ways to do that. You know what I'm saying? There's other ways.
That's a really good idea, actually. What you're saying, you know, I've seen that happen many a times.
Right, we're forced into it. We're forced to be around each other, and you're gonna have to respect each other, because you don't want, you know, I don't want to beef with some white kid just because I don't have his particular views. We're here for the music, and I think music connects us all. And heavy music is, like you said, this community. This is one of the only places. And it's funny we're having this conversation, but it's only one of the only places that I've ever really truly felt accepted. You know, that I've ever felt like I was okay and I can do all the wild shit and say all the things that I say on stage without having someone look at me funny and say, well, what are you talking about? You know, or that you're not supposed to dress like that because everything's about chains and bling and being this, because that's what hip hop seems to be like. You know, it's like, it's so inclusive, but at the same time, it's so exclusive. And I think, you know, heavy music, it's really for the outlier. It's for the person that feels they're on the fringe of some sort of social groups, because then we come together and we really appreciate that about each other, because we appreciate the heaviness of the music. So I think center it around the music more, and center it around sharing that community a bit more, and we can build from there.
I think like a quick story about that in particular was hearing this podcast that I was at my friend's house, and he was interviewing will.i.am from Black Eyed Peas, and they were talking how they actually knew each other was that they were on Warped Tour together. It was my friend Toby Morris from H2O, was in a hardcore band. He's straight edge, very positive podcast that he has. And he was able to interview will.i.am, who came to his kitchen, you know, drove there and was like, yo, I remember you from Warped Tour days when people were throwing bottles at us and stuff. And he's like, but what was really great about that tour is that he discovered all the bands that were on the tour, became friends with a lot of them throughout the tour, and developed his showmanship of really how to win over a crowd, how to really work that, from watching bands like Slipknot, other bands that he mentioned. From watching those bands, he was like, wow, okay, I see how this is going. I see how this is working. And so that it really meant a lot to him to be on that tour. Actually, he said it changed his whole career being on that tour, even though it was difficult to get in, but it was worth the fight. You know, there were people that weren't accepting at first, didn't really understand what was going on, but that diversity of bringing those different groups together can really unite people in a way that music does. You know, there's no borders, no boundaries or barriers. But it's great I also agree that it's great to just be known as the artist, but there are differences, and it's great to recognize those differences. And I definitely feel more secure as I got older, saying like, I'm Black, you know, I definitely am proud of that. And because of that, I am who I am. You know, I didn't have a choice to be Black, and neither does any other person have a choice in what color they're going to be. But it is a part of my identity, and things that I've learned, and it's important for people to understand that. Like, I started to understand a lot of my white friends that weren't just white. I realized there was actually more to them, as far as like, oh, wait a minute, this guy's from Serbia, his parents are there, he speaks 2 different languages, boom, you know, like a lot of different backgrounds. So, you know, it's great, that diversity, knowing that, because you can learn so much from the cultures, from the diversity of being in that environment. But it was really great hearing will.i.am talk about this. He was like, the festival was great because the mix of different bands. And we've done festivals in the past in France or in Hungary and places where De La Soul is playing, Mos Def is playing. You know, it's just like that mixture is something I want to see because I love good music. But also the fact that it really, I love seeing the crowd and diversity of people getting into having that option of seeing something that they may not have gone to. They might not have gone to a Mos Def show, but to see that at a festival, it's like, oh, okay. I see them for their music, you know, what they're doing, you know, what their creativity. And, you know, those changes can really happen by using that music, you know, like you were saying, you know, having that ability to let that stick together, you know, be together. So, you know, a lot of people are feeling like will.i.am was talking about how he felt on the outside, you know, feeling like really very weird, you know, in particular situations, and just kind of working his way into that and getting a better understanding, becoming more comfortable with it.
One of the things that, I don't know how you all feel about this, but one of the things that I've tried to stop doing in interviews, and people have been desperate for it because everyone's like, oh my God, who's the nearest black person? Is I heard a term called trauma porn.
What's it called?
Trauma porn.
Trauma porn.
And so I made a decision with myself to stop giving people my stories so that they can go, oh my God, she went through this racist thing. Oh my God. Close the magazine, done. And now it's like, unless something's trying to change something or do something or make a difference, I refuse to talk about it. But
so I just want to say one last thing. You know, I think it's really important that we don't overreact, because I don't think our world was any different the day before George Floyd was murdered than the day after he was murdered. I think perceptions change, but the world is fundamentally the same place. Obviously, the reaction to it and all that is changing the world. But I think we have right now is kind of like a dog with its ears up, which is to a certain degree why we're having this conversation. And you know, and with that, I can say just in my time in music, you know, when God Forbid came up in, you know, late 90s, we were a real outlier. And it was like a big story about who we were in the extreme metal world, being a predominantly black band. And I think 10, 15, 20 years later, I think there are way more people of color in the scene. There are more gay people in the scene. There are more trans people in the scene. And it's becoming less and less of a story, and less where people are just good. You know, it's just like, oh, you're just a good musician. And then the fact that you might be minority, maybe that colors that. But I do think there's been progress. And if we don't recognize that, then I think that's a failure on our end as well. We can't just look at what's not working.